We're speaking this evening with Rabbi Mordecai Schreiber, the author of the new novel, the new book, entitled Why People Pray, The Universal Power of Prayer. Good evening, Rabbi. Thank you for joining me.
Good evening. Pleasure.
The book, first of all, I have to say, is tremendously interesting for both people who are religious and people who are not religious. I got a tremendous amount of knowledge out of this book, and you speak from a point of experience and knowledge. You, of course, are a rabbi, but more than just being a rabbi, you came from a position of not being religious to being a rabbi. That's quite a transition. Allow us to start a little bit with your background, where you were born, and what has gotten you to this point.
I was born in what at the time was a British mandate at Palestine, and when I was 9 years old in 1948, it became State of Israel. In my hometown, Haifa, by the sea, people were secular pioneers who left religion back in Europe and came to start a new life as they perceived that there was a very big storm gathering in Europe, later known as the Holocaust. They sacrificed a great deal for this idea, and there didn't seem to be time for prayer and religion and spiritual things. They were busy working day and night, and we children followed in the same path. And yet, as a child, because Haifa is a microcosm of world religions, we have large presence of Muslims and Christians and Jews and Baha'i and others. I was always fascinated with prayer and spirituality. And eventually, when I went to the United States, actually to study journalism, I switched to study of religion, and in the process, I became a rabbi.
Through the years of being a rabbi, you have conducted services, you've done all the things that one would expect. You reached the age where you decided to retire and then took on a second life almost with your traveling. Tell me a little about that.
Yes. Between that, I did other things as well. I wrote and published books, and I was involved in publishing. I started a company in Washington providing foreign language translations for the foreign government. Eventually, I retired about 10 years ago. And then unexpectedly, I was invited to conduct holiday services on cruise ships around the world, which I did for the past 10 years or so. And during that time, I must have visited over 100 countries and islands. And one thing that always drew my attention is that wherever I went on this planet, I always ran across people, sometimes in very large numbers, praying. And eventually I asked myself, why do people pray? What is it? It's not self-evident. And yet it's a common, universal human activity that reaches to the beginning of time and probably will reach to the end of time, and then it's everywhere, even today, wherever you go in the world. And it finally motivated me to write this book, Why People Pray. And so everything that I experienced, everything that I studied, it all came together, and there you have it.
It's a fairly massive undertaking. It's a very broad question to ask.
It is.
To ask why people pray.
It is very massive, but yet I discovered when I started working on it that there is so much in common among all of the belief systems and all of the traditions and creeds. It's not as different from each as it seems to be at first blush. Once you start looking into all these different religions, East and West, there is always the human heart looking for something beyond the material everyday experience. And there is something there that should unite the human race. Unfortunately, historically, it was often a divisive force. And one of the purposes of my book is to show the reader, any reader, that we all in it together. One species on a small planet, because once you go around the world a few times, as I have, it's not that big. You keep going to the same places. There are no other places. And so those places are not that, should not be that divided. And there shouldn't be so much strife and antagonism in the world as there still is today. There should be more meeting of the minds. And I maintain that prayer can do this if it is approached not from a sectarian approach, but as a common human function.
The one thing that I gained from the book, aside from just so much historical information and so much background information, so much education that I gained from this about the history of prayer and the evolution of prayer, was that one theme that seems to run through the book, that there is a sense of commonality between the various religions. I think the best way to put it would be that we're all singing the same tune, it's just in different keys.
Yes.
We're all going about a lot of the same things, just in a slightly different method.
Correct.
You have experienced this firsthand. You have been in synagogues, obviously, but you have also been at Catholic services and Baha'i services and Muslim services, and you have met all of these other religions, and you saw that thin line of commonality amongst all of them.
And I was impressed by the piety of Muslims and of Catholics and of Southern Baptists and all these different places. I must say, you cannot really argue with the innermost feelings of people. That's what makes us human, and that's what should bring us together. Yes, there is great commonality, absolutely.
In the book, you also address the issues of what people pray for.
Yes.
And again, there is a strong line of commonality depending on where you are in the world. Someone here in North Carolina, where I am, may not be praying for anything all that different from what someone in Bahrain is praying for, or in Guam. Peace, love, health, happiness, food. There are very common themes there as well.
Yes, indeed. Different languages, different cultures, different evolution, different histories, but always coming back to the same point, always returning to certain basic principles that tie it all together. And I think nobody has captured it better than the Baha'i faith, which is, I don't know, it's less than 200 years old, and it came out of the Middle East. It's not well known in the world, but they discovered the connection, the connectivity between the Buddha and the Moses and Jesus and all of these people. There is a continuum in history. It's not that one is replacing the other. It's not that one is superseding what somebody else said. And you know, it took the Catholic Church almost 2,000 years, finally in Vatican II, to make this statement. Yes, there's the new covenant of Christianity, but there's the old covenant of Judaism. And the church finally, after we had the horrible Holocaust in Europe, after the terrible experience of the 20th century, World War II, finally there is some kind of an awakening in the world, a realization, maybe not shared by all people, because there are all kinds of agendas in the world, but some of the principles, the Vatican, the churches, Protestant churches in Europe and America, many or faith movements now know and understand these things that took so long to come around to, and I think that's very encouraging.
In that commonality, in your either direct or indirect studies through your experiences, your travel, you have seen the methodology of prayer. And understanding that methodology from the various religions is something that you address in the book as not just an educational thing, but also showing how people reach out to a higher power, God, the universe, whatever they perceive as being bigger than themselves. Address, if you would, just a little bit of those, what to us, to the outsider, might seem as radical differences, with Muslims praying multiple times a day, Hasidic Jews with the rocking and the preparation for prayer that you talk about, to the Pentecostal Baptist with the joy and excitement and screaming and shouting and dancing and prayer. Talk a little bit about those differences that you've witnessed, and how they affect people's communing with God or with that greater power.
Well, within the spectrum of what we call worship, prayer, meditation, and so on, there is a range. And for a good example would be an African American, let's say Baptist church, that is where there is dancing and singing and rocking and shouting, and compare that to another American denomination called the Quakers, who sit there in silence. And I had a neighbor in Cincinnati who was a young Quaker couple who went on Easter to their service, and they sit there and very quiet. And then suddenly somebody gets up and says something. I guess he's moved by the Spirit. But you see, the element of sound in service goes from the very loud to pure silence. Mm-hmm. And so some prefer the silence, and others prefer loud, ecstatic jubilation. They are still in the same camp. They are all representing various facets of the prayer faith experience from different angles. And some of them prefer one end of the spectrum, some prefer the others, but it's all part of the service, which has many, there are many references to this in scriptures of all the great religions, where one finds God in silence and one finds God in a storm, in an earthquake. Story of Elijah in the Bible is a good example where he finds God. So yes, there are very distinctive differences among various faith systems, but they're all operating within a continuum which is all one and the same. You know, I was on the island of Bali a couple of years ago, which is mostly Hindu. Most of Indonesia is Muslim, but Bali is mostly Hindu, Indonesia. And he said to us on the bus that Hinduism, which has many deities, so to speak, believes in one God. They all believe that the different, Vishnu, and it's all manifestation of the one transcendental one God, which manifested to them in various the different varieties of personification, if you will. Mm-hmm. And that was very interesting for me to hear that. You go to Japan, Shinto, they have thousands of deities. Almost everybody has a personal God, but it still doesn't matter. When you think about it, every human being has a different idea of God or the absence thereof. Each one of us has his or her personal belief, and it's different from your sister and your brother and your grandparents. It's personal. Judaism has recognized this way back. And so, yeah, God is one, but the manifestations are endless. And that's something we have to embrace.
One of the things that that you address in the book is that even people who are not religious do still pray, at least in some form or fashion. And when I read that, I remembered an episode when I was a child. My mother, who was a devout Methodist, we had gone to a public park and they had a wishing well. And at the ripe age of 4 or 5 years old, I asked her to explain to me what a wish was, which is a daunting task when you try to explain that to a small child. But I thought she did it so succinctly, and one of the passages in the book made me remember it, that she said a wish is a prayer to the universe. It's a hope for something better.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, even people who proclaim to be atheist or agnostic, who are not religious, not practicing, they still, in one form or fashion, find a way to pray.
Yes. Yes. That's very true. That's very true. As I said in the beginning, I was raised by secular Jews who didn't pray, my parents, their friends. And yet, I was a very observant child, and I always looked for these things. And I could see there were always moments, especially, we were in a very precarious situation, declaring a little state there, surrounded by so many enemies that pounced on us the morning after. I mean, our existence was so precarious, it was almost ridiculous. And you could see people, you could see it in their eyes, in their words, in their gestures. They were not open, they didn't open a prayer book, but they were praying in their thoughts, in their feeling, in their songs. There was a lot of singing in those days. They had to, give themselves encouragement to be able to go through this ordeal that was superhuman. And when you analyze a lot of those folk songs they used to sing in those days, a lot of it is really, there's a lot of praying in those words. And I find prayer in country music. I find it in popular and pop music. I use some of this in my book. Morning Has Broken.
Right.
It's really a Scottish hymn, but it became a popular song. Cat Stevens. Or, what's his name? John Lennon, Imagine. These are prayers. They're popular songs. But to many people, many young people today, those songs are a form of prayer. And most of them are about love. And love is the essence of belief, of prayer. Without love, prayer doesn't exist.
One of the things, and we'll bring this to a close here, that you speak of is the evolution of prayer. How it has changed from animal sacrifices in Judaism through to Southern Pentecostal holiness churches and picking up snakes and the huge variety, but there has been an evolution of prayer. What is the state of prayer today, in your opinion?
Well, I think that prayer today is in a state of flux. In various Christian groups, in various Jewish movements, in many other places. There's a lot of writing of new prayers, of new hymns, of new melodies. I think that there's a search for making prayer more relevant to a world that has changed so radically just in our lifetime. I mean, from the time we were little to today, it's a different world. A lot of things that used to be so evident, sin was a very, well-established concept. Not so clear anymore what sin really means and how much emphasis it requires. So, for example, the Episcopalian now ordained women. Reform Judaism in America, and as well as conservative, ordains women. That's a tremendous change. As our social fabric keeps changing, so does prayer, belief, etc. And I think that this process is just at its beginning. And my hope and wish is that the change goes in the direction of more inclusiveness, of more bringing everyone together. I think it's critical. We can either destroy ourselves and destroy our planet, which is not going to be hard to do, you know, or we can kind of wake up and say, enough is enough. There's been enough, we've caused enough damage to ourselves and our planet. Let's get together.
And prayer
That's
can
my
be that
message.
tool. Prayer can be that tool that helps bring
Yes.
all of these various factions and facets to this
Yeah.
to the crystal that is our planet. It can help bring us together.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And that is my ultimate goal in writing this, in hopefully continuing to spread this message, which is really my purpose in writing the book. I am at an age and a point in my life. I'm not looking to gain more wealth. I don't need it. I am not, fame is flimsy and ephemeral. But if you can make just a little change in the world for the better, nobody can take it away from you, and you will die a happy man. In my opinion, that's my purpose.